Evet, hadi başlayalım bakalım. Önce bir ses kontrolü yapalım yine. Bir sorun var mı arkadaşlar seste?
Hayır hocam, geliyor sesim.
Tamam, çok güzel. Sınav sonuçlarınızı gördünüz değil mi? Çok parlak değil ne yazık ki ama finalde inşallah daha iyi olacak. Öyle umut ediyorum. Birkaç arkadaş başka bir bölümden de sanırım öyle bir hata olmuş. Yanlışlar doğruları götürüyor mu gibi böyle bir soru sorulmuş. Kontrol ettim, öyle bir opsiyon var şeyde ama o opsiyonu kullanmadık. Kontrol de ettim, bir hata olmuş olabilir mi acaba diye. Hayır, yanlışların doğruyu götürmediği durumda almış olduğunuz notlar bunlar. Dediğim gibi sınavın toplam süresi değil ama her bir soruya düşen süre anlamında sıkıntı olduğunu düşünüyorum. Konuşup Türkan Hoca ile ona da bir çözüm getireceğiz herhalde final dönemi için. Peki, şimdi geçen dersimizde neden bahsettik en son? Price Consumption Curve'den bahsettik. Bir onu hatırlayalım. Ondan sonra da bağlantılı diğer konumuza geçelim. Okay, on Monday we have talked about the price consumption curve, which is about the price which shows the locus of the points, while the price of good X changing, the choice of consumer is also changing, and the locus of these choice points of or utility maximizing points of the consumer is giving the price consumption curve. And we said that the price consumption, by using price consumption curve, it is possible to derive the individual demand function, and this individual demand function, or the shape of the, or the slope of the price consumption curve show us the, or indicates the price elasticity of demand and also cross elasticity of demand. That was the topic of Monday. Today, we will extend our topic with income consumption curve. Income consumption curve, which will show us while the income of consumer changes continuously, how the decision or the choice of the consumer changes. So, suppose that at the beginning, this consumer is consuming two goods, X and Y, and at the beginning, the budget line of the consumer is just like that. The horizontal intercept is I over Px, and the vertical intercept is I over Py. And suppose that the best affordable bundle of this consumer is located at point E, where the highest indifference curve touches to this budget line. U0 is the initial utility level of the consumer, and for utility maximization, this consumer must consume X0 amount of X and Y0 amount of Y. And suppose that the initial income is I, or budget is I, price of X is Px, and the price of Y is Py. That's the first situation. Then in the second step, suppose that the income of consumer increases to I prime, which is greater than I prime is greater than I, while the other things staying constant. There is no change in prices. So what will happen to the graph in that case if the budget of consumer increases? Then the budget line will shift to right. Parallel shift to right, right? Just like that. And here, I prime over Px and I prime over Py we will have. And also, the choice of the consumer will also change. The point E is not the choice of the consumer because the point is just below the new budget line, which means that the entire budget is not consumed at point E. So the higher utility level is possible for this consumer. on, let's say, U1 indifference curve, the point F is the new equilibrium or choice of the consumer, which means that now x1 units of x and y1 units of y will be consumed to maximize the utility. Bu arada tabii bunun yanına da grafik çizeceğiz. O yüzden şunları şimdiden ben bir silip yan tarafa taşıyayım. Çünkü bir adım sonrasında income consumption curve'den sonra oradan yola çıkarak başka bir şeyler üretebileceğimizi söyleyeceğiz. Onların grafiğinde şimdiden yerini yapalım. Ona göre yazımızı yazalım. Yani bir buraya grafik yapacağız. Bir buraya. Dolayısıyla şuraya tekrar taşıyalım. In the first step, we said that the income of the consumer is I, price of X is PX, and the price of Y is PY. And in the second step, we said that the income has increased to I prime, which is greater than the initial income, and there is no change in the prices. We assume. And in the third step, let's say, in the third step, again, we assume the income of the consumer has increased once more. So I2 prime is greater than I prime and there is no change in prices again. So as you can guess, the budget line will shift to the right once more, just like that. The new intersects I2 prime over PX and I2 prime over PY. And of course, as you can again guess, a higher utility level is possible for this consumer. U2 is the new utility level of this consumer, and the choice will be on point G, bundle G, which contains X2 units of X and suppose here Y2 units of Y. Income consumption curve is the locus of these choices of the consumer while the income changes and the prices stay constant. So these points E, F, and G, and all the other possible points while the income of consumer changes is called as income consumption curve, ICC in short. And on an income consumption curve, these are all the choice of the consumer. So the choice of the consumer is determined, please remember, where marginal at point E, here for this one E, this one F, and this one G are the choice. For all these points E, F, and G, please try to understand that the equilibrium condition, which is marginal rate of substitution of X for Y, equal to the price ratio. These are all the tangency points, as you can see. So marginal rate of substitution just equals to price of X over price of Y on this income consumption curve for all these points. This is valid. So the functional form, actually, the income consumption curve is this equation. Sorularda hatırlayın. Marginal rate of substitution'ı price ratio'ya eşitlediğimiz zaman bir denklik buluyorduk, değil mi? X eşittir 2'ye, 2'ye eşittir 3x gibi bir denklik buluyorduk. O bulmuş olduğumuz denklik aslında bize her gelir düzeyinde, çünkü şuradan gelirden bağımsız bir durumdan bahsediyoruz, değil mi? Bu teğetin birinci koşulu. Dolayısıyla da bu koşulun sağlanıyor olması aslında bize gelir düzeyinden bağımsız olarak X ile Y arasında nasıl bir denge kurulması gerektiğini gösteriyor. X eşittir 3Y bulduysanız Y'nin 3 katı kadar X tüketecek. Ama kaç tane X, kaç tane Y olduğunu nerede buluyoruz dedik? Bunu bütçe doğrusunda yerine koyuyorduk. Bütçe fonksiyonunda yerine koyarak buluyorduk. Dolayısıyla Bu noktaların her biri, yani marjinal ikame oranının fiyat oranına eşitlendiği noktalardan her biri bir muhtemel denge noktasıdır. Çeşitli gelir düzeylerinde oluşabilecek denge noktasını gösterir. Dolayısıyla da bunlar, bu denklik, buradan elde edeceğimiz denklik aslında income consumption curve'ün fonksiyonel biçimidir diyebiliriz. Yani o noktalar, diyelim ki x eşittir 2y bulduysanız eğer, bu income consumption curve x eşittir 2y şeklindeki doğruya eşit olacak. So we can conclude that each point on the income consumption curve satisfies the marginal rate of substitution equal to price of x over price of y. So these are the possible choice of the consumers for the different income levels we can conclude. And by using income consumption curve, just remember the lesson on Monday. We said that by using price consumption curve, we can derive the individual demand function. And by using income consumption curve, it's possible to derive, we can derive the Engel function of the consumer. The Engel function, Engel, is the surname of an economist, Friedrich Engel, German economist, Friedrich Engel, who studied about the food demand of people and the relation related to the income of the consumers. Income and food demand relationship is studied by Friedrich Engel, and by referring to this study, the functions which relates Engel function, the functions which relates quantity demanded as a function of income of the consumer is called as Engel function. So by using income consumption curve, we can derive the Engel function of the consumer. So for good, let's start with good x here. Let's put the amount of x to the horizontal axis and the income of the consumer to the vertical axis. At the beginning, we assumed that the income of the consumer was I. Let's suppose that the initial income is located here. And with this income level, while the utility of consumer maximized, he was consuming x0 amount of good x. So the first bundle of first couple of income and quantity demanded, here we can also write quantity demanded of good x, is located just here. That's the reflection of the point E, the choice of the consumer for the Engel function. So if the income is I, then the x0 amount of x will be consumed for the maximum utility. Then we assume that the income of consumer has increased to I prime. So suppose that the I prime is located here, just greater than the initial income. Then the consumer's demand for good x has increased to x1. For this income level, the budget line has shifted to right. The red budget line is the new one. So the quantity demanded for good x in that case will be x1 for this income level. So the second couple of income quantity demanded will be located here at point F, the reflection of this point F. And finally, we assume that the income has increased once more, I2 prime. Suppose that I2 prime is located here. And in this situation, again, the budget line of the consumer has shifted to right, and the choice of the consumer in this income level is at point G. So the consumer will consume now x2 amount of good x, x2 amount of good x. So for I2 prime income, the quantity demanded of x will be x2 at point G. So by using all these points, these couples of income and quantity demanded at E, F, and G, we can derive the Engel function of this consumer. So this one is the Engel curve for good X. What can you say about good X by looking at the shape of or the slope of the Engel curve? You can see the Engel curve for good X is positively sloped. What does it mean, do you think? It's a normal good alone. Yes. The normal good is defined as if there is a positive relationship between income and quantity demanded. So we found a positively sloped Engel curve for good X. So we can conclude that by using that positively sloped Engel curve, we can conclude that good X is a normal good. Allah, bu arada senin sınav notun en şaşırdıklarımdan biri oldu. Niye o kadar düşük geldi? 60 mıydı? 57 miydi? Öyle bir şeydi galiba, değil mi? 50 miydi yoksa? 65. Peki. Daha yüksek bir not beklerdim. Acaba nasıl bir problem oldu?
It's because that thing I had the hard problems in the beginning, and I thought the exam will be hard as these problems. So I said the time was too short for me, and I said, okay, I need to solve them so fast. And in the end, like the last 20 questions were so easy, and I had extra time, so I couldn't go back to the other problems.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay,
that
sorry.
was my problem.
Okay.
But it's fine.
Okay, okay. It will be better, I hope, on final exams. Okay, so we can say that good X is a normal good, and we can also derive the Engel function for good Y, because the change in income also affects the demand for good Y. Now we will put the income level here and the quantity demanded of good Y on the vertical axis, because here we located good Y to the vertical axis, so we will reflect that Y values into this graph. That's why we are putting the quantity demanded of good Y to the vertical axis and the income to the horizontal axis for this graph. And again, at the beginning, we assumed that the income level was I, and at this income level, this consumer was consuming Y0 amount of good Y for the utility maximization. So the first couple of income and quantity demanded for good Y can be reflected to the third graph like this. This is the reflection of this point E to this graph, to the Engel function of good Y. And then we assumed that the income has increased to I prime. So the budget line of the consumer has shifted to right. So the utility maximizing level of Y in this case is Y1. Let's reflect it here. Y1. It's point F. And finally, again, the income of consumer has increased to I2 prime at the third stage. And again, the budget line has shifted to right. So the new utility maximizing level of Y is determined at point G. So this consumer will consume Y2 amount of good Y. In that case, at point G, this is the reflection of this point G to the Engel function. So again, we will find the Engel curve for good Y by using the income consumption curve data. That is the Engel curve for good Y. So again, we found a positive slope Engel curve for good Y. So we can conclude that good Y is a normal good. Again, Y is a normal good for this consumer. Again, normal good. The definition, just like good, bad, or neutral, the definition of normal or inferior is a subjective definition. For some people, one good can be normal, or for some people, it can be inferior good. Actually, not from person to person. The definition of normal and inferior can also change according to the income level. Especially in the relatively low income levels, most of the people can think that this is a normal good, but for relatively higher income levels, then the same good can be evaluated as the inferior good. So the normality or inferiority of the good is just dependent on the level of income actually. Here, but we found positive slope Engel curve. So this person, this individual thinks that this good is always normal for all income levels, for any income levels. While the income increases, the quantity demanded will increase. So it's always normal good for this individual. Also, we can conclude that if income consumption curve of a good is positively sloped, both of the goods are normal goods, because positively sloped income consumption curve tell us while the income of consumer increases, both amount of X and Y increases, while the budget line shifts to right, increasing income of the consumer. Both consumption of X and the consumption of Y increases when the income consumption curve is positively sloped. So we can simply conclude that, let's write it here with red ink. If income consumption curve is positively sloped, then both X and Y are normal goods. So what is the alternative? So if income consumption curve is positively sloped, then it could be possibly negatively sloped in some cases. Let's see how it's negatively sloped now. And let's say relationship between income consumption curve and income elasticity. Let's say income and elasticity of income. We have talked about the relationship between price consumption curve and price elasticity of demand, and also cross elasticity of demand. So we can relate the shape of the income consumption curve to the income elasticity. So the income elasticity, as you know, determines the normality or inferiority of the good. So it can be related to the shape of or the slope of the income consumption curve. Actually, we have already talked about the positive slope income consumption curve, so I will not write it here again, but the first one that we can say about this relationship, if income consumption curve is positively sloped, then both X and Y are normal goods, which means that, let's write it here, the first one, if income consumption curve is positively sloped, then both X and Y are normal goods, which means that elasticity of income for good X and elasticity of income for good Y are both positive. So these are normal goods for all income levels. So what's the alternative? The second part of this story is that suppose that here X and Y are located. Suppose that the income consumption curve is just like that. So a kind of inverted U shape. So this is, suppose that, income consumption curve. So each point on this income consumption curve are the possible utility maximizing points for the different income levels. So for example, for this point E, there is a budget line and also a parallel, not parallel, tangency indifference curve. For this point, for F, we have another budget line and another tangency indifference curve, and so on. For simplification, I will not draw the budget lines and the indifference curve, but please be informed that each point on this income consumption curve are the possible choices of the consumer for different income levels. Of course, when we go up or when we go right side, the income, you can understand that the income of consumer increases, the budget line just shifts to the right. Şimdi burada aslında söylemeye çalıştığım şey şu, şuraya kabaca çizeyim, sonra sileceğim. Income consumption curve üzerindeki tüm noktalar, bu çizmiş olduğum üzerindeki tüm noktalar bir aslında bütçe doğrusuyla kayıtsızlık eğrisinin teğet olduğu noktalar. Bu noktada da bir teğet var. İşte burada da yine bütçesi farklı, burada da bütçesi farklı ve böyle devam ediyor. Ancak buradaki önemli nokta, bir noktadan sonra bu income consumption curve'ün pozitif eğimliden negatif eğimliye doğru dönüyor olması. Inverted U-shape, ters U şeklinde olduğunu varsayalım dedik. Şimdi şunu tekrar silelim. So again, each point on this income consumption curve are the possible choices of the consumer for different income levels. And here the important thing is that here we have an critical income level. So let's draw only that budget line. And suppose that that is I star budget. So of course, at this point, there is a tangency indifference curve. So that is a point on the income consumption curve. And until this I star budget, the income consumption curve is positive slope. However, after this I star budget, the income consumption curve is becoming negative slope. So how can we comment this situation? Let's start with, we will so separate this story into two parts. If the income level is less than I star, the critical income level at the maximum point of the income consumption, not the maximum point, but you can say the threshold level or whatever. If the income level is less than I star income, the critical income level, then while income of consumer increases, both the consumption of X and consumption of Y increases, because we know that until that point, the income consumption curve is positive slope, which means that for the increasing income levels, the consumption of X and Y will increase. So this consumer thinks that until this I star income level, both X and Y are normal goods. But after this critical income level, if the income of this consumer is greater than I star, then it's becoming negative slope. Please try to see that after that point, if the income of consumer increases, the amount of or quantity of X continue to rise. However, the amount of Y consumed starts to decrease. So what can you say about the good X and good Y in that case? After I start income level, while income increases, again, the quantity demanded of X continues to increase. However, the amount of good Y demanded starts to decrease. So what's the evaluation of this consumer about the X and Y? What can you say about good X and good Y after this critical income level? Yes, Allah, exactly. X is always normal good for this consumer for all income levels, while income increases for any income levels. The consumption of X increases while the income increases. However, good Y is becoming an inferior good after this critical income threshold. So good Y is becoming an inferior good after I start. Inferior good. How income increases at this point? I didn't get it. After this point, let's put a number. Point A. A noktasından sonrasını mı anlamadın Talha?
Evet hocam.
Bak şimdi. Aslında bu, hani şöyle çiziyoruz ya, bunun üzerindeki bütün noktalar dedik ya, possible choice of consumer. Buradaki durum nasıl? Bütçesi artıyor, artıyor, artıyor, artıyor. Şurası A noktası artıyor. Burada da artıyor. Bütçesi artmaya devam ediyor. Bütçesi artmaya devam ediyor. Doğru mu? Şurası da bir denge noktası. Buradan da bir şey geçiyor. Kayıtsızlık eğrisi. Buradan da bir kayıtsızlık eğrisi geçiyor. Dolayısıyla da buraya geldiği zaman, A noktasından buraya geldiği zaman bu adamın geliri artmış mı? Artmış. Bütçe doğrusu sağa doğru kaymış. Ama bütçe doğrusu sağa doğru kaydığında X malının tüketimi arttığı halde Y malının tüketimi ne olmuş? Azalmış ya da şurası B diyelim ki B'den C'ye geçti. Bütçesi artmış mı bu adamın? Evet artmış. Bütçe doğrusu sağa doğru kaymış. Bütçe sağa doğru kaydığında X malının tüketimi artmış. Ama Y malının tüketimi ne olmuş? Azalmış. Dolayısıyla bu A noktasındaki gelir düzeyi, şu bütçe doğrusu hangi gelir düzeyini gösteriyorsa, I star dedik biz buna, kritik gelir düzeyi. O gelir düzeyini aştıktan sonra Y malı bu tüketici için fakir mal mı diyorduk, ne diyorduk, düşük mal haline gelmiş diyebiliriz. Aslında gerçekten de öyle. Belli bir gelir düzeyine kadar tüm bireyler, herkes bir malı normal kabul ederken belli bir gelir düzeyinden sonra o belli gelir düzeyinin tanımı farklılaşabilir kişiden kişiye ama mutlaka belli bir gelir düzeyinden sonra o malın inferior kabul edilmesi geçerli olacaktır diye düşünebiliriz. Burada da onu söylemeye çalışıyoruz. Okay, are we okay? Talha anladı. Any problem? No? Okay. We will turn to the third part, but firstly, let's have a break, 10 minutes break, then we will continue. So we said that if the income consumption curve is just here, inverted U shape, like in our example, then the good X is always normal good, which means that, let's write it here, the elasticity of income for good X is always positive. However, for good Y, elasticity of income for good Y is at first positive, but then becoming negative. So what's the shape of the Engel function in that case? for good X and for good Y. The engel function for good X. Bunu silmeyeceğim. Belki daha sonra baktığınızda hatırlamak isteyebilirsiniz diye. Yani kötü bir şekil oldu ama yine de dursun, silmeyeceğim. If we put the quantity demanded of good X here and the income here, so for good X is a normal good for all income levels. So engel curve for good X is always positively sloped. However, the engel curve for good Y, for example, quantity demanded of good Y is located in the horizontal axis and the income is located in the vertical axis until a critical income level, I star, that we have determined here at point A, until that I star income level, it's a normal good, so the engel curve is positively sloped, normal good. But after this income level, it's becoming an inferior good, which means that it's becoming negatively sloped after these threshold levels. So until this income level, the good Y can be defined as a normal good for this person. And after this income level, it's becoming inferior good. Bu arada şimdi kitabımıza baktım hangi eksene neyi koymuşlar diye. Bizde dikey eksene income'ı, yatay eksene de mal miktarını koymuş taleple bağlantılı olsun diye. Tersi de yapılabilir. Onu da görürseniz şaşırmayın. Yani bunu şöyle de çizebiliriz aslında. Aynı şey demektir. We can also, it's possible to put the income level to the horizontal axis and the quantity demanded of good Y to the vertical axis. In that case, the engel function, engel curve for good Y will be inverted U-shape, and at this point is the critical income level I star. Bizim kitabımız bunu kullanmış. Income'ı buraya koymuş ama böyle de çizilebilir. Öyle görürsek de şaşırmayalım. Önemli olan nokta belli bir gelir seviyesine kadar pozitif eğimli, yani normal mal olduğunu düşünüyor. O gelir seviyesinden sonra birden negatif eğimli hale geliyor. Daha önce biz ikinci chapter'da buna benzer bir örnek yaptık mı? Bu kritik income seviyesinin bulunması ile ilgili sanki yaptık diye hatırlıyorum. Var mı hatırlayan? We have already made some example about the inverted U-shaped engel curve in chapter 2. Do you remember it, Allah? We have already made some only one example about the inverted U-shaped engel curve to find the critical income level. No, you don't remember? No, okay, no problem. Well, so let's come to the third case and then turn to another topic. The third case is again, income consumption curve of the consumer starts with positive slope, like here, then backward bending, that kind of income consumption curve. Again, positively sloped. So here we have a critical income level again. So here we have a budget line, a critical budget line, let's say again, I star. And until this I star income level, while the income of consumer increases until I star income level, which means that if income is less than I star, while income increasing, the budget line shifts to right, both consumption of X and Y also increases. So until this income level, the consumer thinks that both good X and good Y are normal goods. But after I star income level, which means that if the income is greater than I star, when income increases, buraya doğru kaymış, daha da fazla kaymış, daha da fazla kaymış. While income increases, now try to see that the consumption of Y increases, but the consumption of X starts to decrease, right? So consumption of Y increases, but consumption of X starts to decrease after these critical income levels. So in this case, we can think that good Y is always normal good for this consumer. However, after I start critical income level, good X is becoming an inferior good for the consumer. Just the reverse of the second case. In the second case, we said that if the income consumption curve is inverted U shape, then after a critical income level, we said I star, while income increases, quantity demanded of X increases, but Y starts to decrease after this level. So X is always normal good, but Y is becoming an inferior good after this critical income level. So this is the reverse of this example. Here, the income consumption curve is backward bending. So in that case, again, until this critical income level, let's say this point is again A, until point A, an increasing income level, the shifting budget lines will give consumer to demand more X and more Y. So until this level, the consumer thinks that both goods are normal here in that part. But after this income level, after this I star, the budget line again shifts to right, but now the consumption of Y continuously increases, but the consumption of Y starts to decrease after this critical point. So here in this example, good X is becoming inferior after I star income level. So the Engel curve for good Y in that case is always positively sloped. The Engel curve for good X. Suppose the income here and quantity demanded of Y here is always positively sloped, that is Engel curve for Y. And for good X, Engel curve, again, if we put income to the horizontal axis and the quantity demanded of X to the vertical axis, it will start as positively sloped until I start critical income level, which means that until that income level, while income increases, quantity demanded of X increases, but after this income level, the good is becoming an inferior good. So that is the Engel curve for good X. Okay, any problem with it? Let's write also the what's elasticity of income elasticity of demand for good Y. Income elasticity of demand for good Y is always positive, that you can understand the slope of the Engel curve. And for good X, until I star income level, elasticity of income for good Y is positive. However, after that level, elasticity of income for good Y is negative. Okay, any problem with it? Any question? No? Okay. So let's turn to the second part of our book, which is focused on the effect of the price change on the consumer's decision or consumer's choice. So we will talk about income and substitution effects for it. And our topic is the price effect. Price effect. And here we will firstly suppose that the consumer is consuming good X and good Y, and with a limited income. So the problem of the consumer is to maximize its utility with the limited income. And suppose that price of X is going down while the other things staying constant, while the price of Y and the income of the consumer stay constant. Suppose that only the price of X is going down. What happens in that case? Let's draw a simple graph here about the choice of the consumer, and then we will try to understand what is happening to the choice of the consumer. What's the reason behind the change in the choice? Here good X and here good Y. Suppose that here I over Px and I over Py, and the initial choice of the consumer is on U0 indifference curve, and at point E, X0 amount of X will be consumed and Y0 amount of Y will be consumed to maximize the utility. Then suppose that the price of X is going down. What will happen while the other things staying constant? What will happen to our graph in that case?
Budget line shifts to right.
Shift. Bilrengin Fan Club. Who are you, Tunahan? Shift demeyelim. Kim konuştu az önce bu arada? Rotates. Good. Thank
Ben
you.
yanlış söyledim hocam. Fark ettim
Rotate
sonra.
diyeceğiz, değil mi? Okay. Because there is no change in the vertical intercept, and the budget line will rotate to right. So the horizontal intercept will go right. It is now not I prime, I over Px primes, and we can say that this mu price Px prime is lower than the initial price Px, and then the consumer will increase the level of satisfaction, of course, we expect. So it will just go a higher indifference curve, U1, and the point F is the new choice of the consumer. It's X1. So in normal cases, of course, there are some exceptional cases. We will learn it in this chapter. But in normal cases, we expect that while the price of X is going down, the quantity demanded of good X increases. So this negative relationship is called as the law of demand, as you know. The negative relationship between price and quantity demanded is called as law of demand by Alfred Marshall. Please remember chapter 2, we have talked about it. And yes, Marshall. And now we will turn to the reasons, the negative relationship between price and quantity. Why an individual thinks that why price of X is going down, I need to buy more of good X. What's the reason behind it? We can classify the price effect into the two subsections. The first one is called as substitution effect. And the other one is called as income effect. So, substitution effect is about the relative price changes. Please, the keyword here in substitution effect, keyword is the relative prices. Relative prices. While the price of X is going down, although there is no change in price of Y, it's getting relatively more expensive than the price of X. Suppose that at the beginning, the price of X is 10 and the suppose that at the beginning, the price of X is 10 and the price of Y is 10. Then suppose that the price of X is decreasing to 8 and the price of Y is still 10 lira. So the substitution effects tell us, although there is no change in the price of Y, it was 10, it's now 10. When the price of X is going down from 10 to 8, price of Y is getting relatively more expensive. There is no change in the price of Y, but it's getting relatively more expensive while the other good is getting cheaper. So the consumer always, this consumer, a normal consumer always prefers the cheaper one, the relatively cheaper one to the relatively expensive one. And that's why the consumer, because of the substitution effect, the consumer wants to consume more of good X, and that is called as substitution effect. So when the price of X is going down, it means that the quantity demanded of good X will increase because of the substitution effect. Quantity demanded of good X will increase because of the substitution effect. Please try to see that the substitution effect is negatively related with the price change. While the price of X is going down, although there is no change in the price of Y, it's getting relatively more expensive than the X. So the consumer prefers the relatively cheaper one to the relatively more expensive one. That's why quantity demanded of good X increases because of the substitution effect. Try to see, while price of X is decreasing, quantity demanded increasing. So substitution effect is always negative with the price change. Substitution effect is always negatively related to the price changes. But when we come to the income effect, it's about here the keyword is the purchasing power or real income. Here the keyword is purchasing power or real income, same thing. When the price of X is going down, it's getting cheaper. Although there is no change in the income of the consumer, suppose that the income of the consumer was 1,000 Turkish lira and it's still 1,000 Turkish lira, no change in the income. But the purchasing power of this 1,000 Turkish lira is increasing. So while the price of X is going down, the real income of this consumer increases, or the purchasing power of the income. Real income means purchasing power. Real income increases. And when the real income of a consumer increases, the consumer may prefer to buy more of this good, or in some cases, although the real income increases, quantity demanded of this good may decrease. It depends on the consumer's preferences about this good. While the real income increases, if quantity demanded increases because of the income effect, the consumer thinks that good X is what kind of good? While real income increases, I prefer to buy more of this good. So this good is what kind of good? Is a normal good for this consumer. Yes, Allah, yes, Yunus. It's a normal good. But although the real income or the purchasing power of the consumer increases, in some cases, quantity demanded of this good because of the income effect may decrease. In that case, this consumer thinks that this good is a what kind of good? Inferior good. Inferior good. Well, so let's try to find the relationship between the price change and the quantity change. For a normal good case, while the price of X is going down, quantity demanded increases. Price of X is going down, so the real income of the consumer increases, and that's why he wants to buy more of this good. The relationship between price and quantity is negative, right? Is negative. For normal goods, the relationship between price and quantity demanded is negative. However, for inferior goods, the price of good X is decreasing, so the real income is increasing, and the quantity demanded for this good is decreasing. Price decreasing and quantity decreasing. So for inferior good, the relationship between price and quantity demanded is positive. The price effect or the total effect of the price change, or the total effect of the price change. Say. Or the total effect is the sum of income and substitution effects. Substitution effects plus income effect. And substitution effect is always negative, which means that when the price of X is going down, the price of Y, there's no change in the price of Y, but it's getting relatively more expensive, and the consumer wants to consume the cheaper one will prefer the cheaper one to the relatively expensive one. That's why the demand for good X will increase. So the substitution effect will always negative with the price change, negatively related with the price change. But income effect may be positive or negative according to the definition of the good by the consumer. If it's a normal good, it could be negative for normal goods. And it could be positive for inferior goods. So the total effect, the way of or the direction of the total effect is just depends on the sum of substitution and income effect. So it depends on which one dominates the other one. And we can classify the goods according to this domination relationship. Şimdi bu kısmı bir kere de bir Türkçe anlatmamız lazım. Muhtemelen mikroiktisadın en zor konusu içerisindeyiz şu anda. En soyut ve en zor bulunabilecek konusu içerisindeyiz. O yüzden bu haftayı, önümüzdeki haftayı mümkün olduğunca kaçırmamaya ya da sonrasında tekrar etmeye çalışın arkadaşlar. Anlatması da anlaması da bir miktar zor ama üstesinden gelmeye çalışacağız. Şimdi fiyat etkisi dediğimiz şey, bir malın fiyatı değiştiği zaman, X malı bu örnekte ucuzladığı zaman tüketicinin neden o maldan daha fazla almak istediğini sorguluyor. Yani neden ucuzlayan bir malı tüketici daha fazla satın almak ister? Bazen de aslında olmayabilir de bu. Fiyatı ucuzladığı halde daha az da almak isteyebilir ama normal durumdan biz şimdilik bahsedelim. Neden X ucuzlayınca daha fazla X almak isteriz? Bunun iki sebebi vardır diyor. İki alt sebebi vardır. Bunlardan bir tanesi ikame etkisidir. Substitution effect. Ne demektir o? Buradan göreceli fiyatlar, relative fiyatların keyword olduğunu söyledik. Yani relative prices diye bir şey duyduğunuzda bunu mutlaka substitution effect ile kafanızda bağlantılandırmalısınız. Ne demek bu? X malı ucuzladığı zaman Y malının fiyatı değişmese bile nispeten pahalı hale gelir. X'e göre pahalı hale gelir ve tüketici her zaman ucuzlayan malı pahalılaşan mal yerine tercih eder. Ucuzlayan X malını nispeten pahalılaşan, aslında fiyatı aynı ama nispeten pahalılaşan Y malı yerine tercih eder. Dolayısıyla da daha fazla X tüketmek istemesinin birinci sebebi budur. İkame etkisi. İkame etkisi fiyat değişimiyle her zaman zıt yönlü, negatif yönlü hareket eder. Yani X malı ucuzladıysa ikame etkisi nedeniyle o malın talebi her zaman artar. Ya da tersi de geçerli. Birazdan tersi için de örnek yapacağım. Buna karşılık bu işin bir kısmını oluşturur sadece. Diğer kısmında ise income effect vardır, gelir etkisi. Orada da aklımıza gelmesi gereken anahtar sözcükler satın alma gücü ve reel gelir. Buradaki tüketicinin sahip olduğu 1000 lira bu. O tüketicinin nominal geliri, cebindeki monetary income ya da nominal income. Nominal income ya da money income. Buna karşılık X malı ucuzladığı zaman cebindeki para 1000 lira değişmemesine rağmen o 1000 liranın satın alma gücünde bir artış olur. Doğru mu? Zaten bütçe doğrusunun sağa doğru hareketleniyor olması, rotate ediyor olması da bize bunu gösteriyor değil mi? Satın alma gücü bu adamın artmış. Ve tüketiciler satın alma güçleri arttığı zaman iki tür tepki verebilirler. Cebimdeki 1000 liranın satın alma gücü arttı. Bu durumda daha fazla X almalıyım. O zaman X malının o kişi normal bir mal olduğunu düşünüyordur. Buna karşılık tersi de olabilir. Paramın satın alma gücü arttı. Ben en iyisi X almayayım da onun yerine Y alayım daha fazla diyebilir. X malının tüketimini azaltabilir. Bu durumda da o malın düşük mal olduğunu düşünüyordur tüketici. Dolayısıyla bu demek oluyor ki bir malın fiyatındaki değişimin yarattığı toplam etki, bu iki etkinin toplamından oluşuyorsa eğer, ikame etkisiyle gelir etkisinin toplamından oluşuyorsa eğer ve ikame etkisi her zaman negatifse ve ancak gelir etkisi pozitif ya da negatif olabiliyorsa sonucun ne olacağı, toplamın ne olacağı neye bağlıdır? Bu ikame ya da gelir etkilerinden hangisinin aslında daha baskın olacağına bağlıdır. Aslında normal mallar için böyle bir durum söz konusu değil zaten. Her ikisi için de negatif ama düşük mallar için biri negatif, diğeri pozitif. Sonuç negatif mi olacak, pozitif mi olacak? Bunu belirleyen şey hangi etkinin daha baskın olduğu. Şimdi o baskın olma meselesine gelmeden bir de bunun tersi durumu düşünelim. Bugünü öyle kapatmış olalım. Yani X malı ucuzlamasaydı da pahalılaşsaydı işler nasıl gidecekti? Bir de onu konuşalım. Yine aynı şekilde price effect diyelim. Yani bu kez neyi varsayalım? Price of X is going up while price of Y and the income of the consumer is staying constant. Again, if the price of X is changing, there will be two effects will arise. And the sum of these two effects will give us the price effect or the total effect of the price change. Here, the first one is substitution effect, which is about effect. This is E, this is C. Substitution effect, which is about the relative price changes. And the second one is the income effect, which is about the real income changes. Şimdi substitution effect burada nasıl oluşuyor? While price of X is going up. Suppose that initially price of X was 10, price of Y was 10, and the income of the consumer was 1,000. Now suppose that the price of X is 15, price of Y stay constant, and the income of consumers stay constant. Substitution effect here means that when the price of X is going down from 10 to 15, although there is no change in the price of Y, it's still 10, it's getting cheaper for the consumer, right? It's getting relatively cheaper, not cheaper, but relatively cheaper. So the consumer always prefers the cheaper one to the relatively expensive one here. So the consumer wants to consume more of good Y and less of good X because of the substitution effect. So quantity demanded of good X because of the substitution effect decreases because X is getting more expensive, which means that Y is getting relatively cheaper. So the consumer prefers the cheaper one to the relatively more expensive one. That's why he wants to consume less of good X and more of good Y. That is the substitution effect. So again, try to see the negative relationship between price and quantity demanded because of substitution effect. Price of X increases, quantity demanded because of the substitution effect decreases. So we have a negative relationship between price and quantity. And when we come to the income effect, the real income is the keyword for the income effect. We said when the price of X increases, although there is no change in the monetary income, money income of this consumer, he has still 1,000 Turkish lira. But the purchasing power of this 1,000 Turkish lira is going down because this good is getting more expensive. So the real income or the purchasing power of this consumer is going down. And after this real income change, while the real income is decreasing, if this consumer prefers to buy less of this good, then he thinks that the good X is a normal good. Gelirim azaldı, o zaman daha az tüketmeliyim. Which means that here the relationship between price and quantity, price and quantity is still negative. Real income'la ilişkisine göre de bunu işaretlendirebiliriz ama onu önümüzdeki hafta ayrıca açıklayacağım. Burada sadece fiyatla miktar arasındaki ilişkiye bakıyorum. Tekrar söyleyeyim. Fiyatla miktar arasındaki ilişkiye bakıyorum. Negatif ya da pozitif tanımı fiyatla miktar arasındaki ilişkiye göre belirleniyor. But also it's possible that consumer tell us, by real income decreases, then I will buy more of this good. So the relationship between real income and the quantity demanded is negative, but the relationship between price and the quantity is positive. So this good, for this consumer, this good is an inferior good. Inferior good. So again, this positive sign, this negative signs is determined according to the relationship between price and quantity. Price and quantity. Okay, just one thing I would like to add. The normality or inferiority of the good, the definition of normality or inferiority of this good is just changing in chapter 2 and in chapter 4. In chapter 2, we defined normal good as while income increases. If, for example, quantity demanded for X increases, or when income decreases, quantity demanded decreases, or simply income elasticity is positive. This good is defined as normal good, or inferior good is defined as while income increases, quantity demanded decreases, or vice versa. Or simply elasticity, income elasticity of demand is negative. Please try to see that here we are talking about the change in nominal income. So we defined normality or inferiority of this good according to the change in nominal income or money income of consumer. Nominal income. However, in chapter 4, in this chapter, we are defining normal good or inferior good according to the change in real income. Burada yani chapter 2'da normal good'u ya da inferior good'u tanımlarken, hatta bu chapter'ın başında da az önce income consumption curve'de konuştuğumuz üzere işte geliri 1000'den 1500'e çıkarsa, 2000'e çıkarsa, 3000'e çıkarsa talebi ne oluyor ya göre tanımladık. Halbuki işin bu kısmında income effect'i dikkate aldığımız zaman chapter 4'da biz normal good tanımını nominal income'a göre değil de real income'a göre yapıyoruz. Nominal income sabit. Nominal income sabit. Real income arttığında bu malın talebi artıyorsa o mala normal mal diyoruz. Ya da tersini de yazabilirsiniz tabii ki. Ya da real income, satın alma gücü arttığında bu malın talebi azalıyorsa buna da inferior good diyoruz. Aradaki fark önem arz ediyor. Buradaki tanımımız normal ve düşük mal tanımımız tüketicinin nominal geliri yani cebindeki para sabitken, cebinde 1000 lira varken reel gelirinin yani satın alma gücünün değişmesinden kaynaklanan durumu gösteriyor bize. Yani geliri sabitken reel gelirini değiştiren şey ne? X malının fiyatının değişmesi nedeniyle reel geliri değiştiğinde buna nasıl tepki veriyor? Buna göre yaptığımız tanımlama. Peki, bugünü burada kapatalım. Tam 15:30 olmuş. Sorunuz yoksa tamamlayabiliriz dersi arkadaşlar. Sorunuz varsa dinleyebilirim. Peki. Önemli kısmını kaçırmışsın. Hemen izle. Tamam. Peki arkadaşlar, o zaman önümüzdeki pazartesi görüşmek üzere. Dersi kaçırmamaya çalışın. Dediğim gibi muhtemelen mikroiktisadın en zor kısmındayız şu anda. Burayı geçtikten sonra önümüz düzgün. Görüşmek üzere pazartesi günü. Hoşçakalın. Hatta özlü kabahatinden büyük. Uyuyakaldım bu saatte yani. Aşk olsun.